A very popular social media influencer offered a very unpopular solution to a very common problem right now: AI data centers and where exactly they're going to get the water. Her solution? Well, the water from Flint, Michigan, which, despite improvements, is still not fully drinkable for all of its residents. This video started a very heated conversation about scientific racism, and while this content creator has attempted to walk back some of what she said, I still think it's a very important conversation to be had right now in a time where increasingly data centers are being built in predominantly Black and brown communities. And in my opinion, this content creator revealed a very common sentiment that justifies the premise of scientific racism. Several content creators from both inside and outside of Flint, Michigan have shared their perspective about this video, and I thought that it would be a good idea to spread along this information to start a conversation about scientific racism. Anyway, let's jump into Beau Grant's now deleted video.
If the whole thing about these data centers is that it's going to use up all of our water and the community is going to die because it has no more access to drinkable water, then why are they putting it in good communities to ruin those communities? Why not places like Flint, Michigan? Those people can't use their water. It's toxic water. So why wouldn't you go there, buy out the people who are stuck there, let them leave, and then use up all of that water that no one can use anyways? Wasn't there an area in the United States where the train exploded with toxic chemicals and it literally caused acid rain? Why not put a data center there and use up all of that disgusting water? All of these places where there is a water source, but it's so bad that the humans there can't consume it, so they're having to buy bottled water and live off of that. Why not put these data centers there? I don't understand why we have to go to good communities with drinkable water where people are already living and ruin their lives. And the fact that you can't use salt water, but doesn't the U.S. government have an entire system where they desalinate, take the salt out of salt water for their nuclear reactors? The technology already exists, but they're just not using it for these data centers. If this is all for AI, and AI is supposed to help us solve all these problems us as humans haven't been able to solve yet, why the hell is AI not solving its own water issue?
Now, in a way, I can understand the logic behind this and why someone would initially not see the issue with this, right? You think, okay, this community doesn't have clean and drinkable water. Well, why don't we just use that to solve the problem of AI data centers? But I think people who are actually familiar with what's happening in Flint, Michigan will understand why this is not a great take. It's primarily not a great take because the population of Flint, Michigan is predominantly Black, right? And what you are essentially saying is that these people who live in a historically neglected part of the country, neglected because its populace is predominantly Black, should simply just move, right? Should just get up, move, we'll give them some money, and they should give up their homes, give up the community that they live in, and move out of it because they're not living a good quality of life anyway. So why don't we just put the data centers there? Now, if you look at a map of where these data centers are being placed, they're already being predominantly placed in communities where Black and brown people are the dominant populace. When she says something like good communities, she's referring to white communities. And this is a very important thing that I think people need to understand. The racial divisions that exist within this country did not happen overnight. They are a result of systemic racism. They are a result of segregation and redlining that deliberately places Black and brown people in communities where they are not going to have access to things like clean water. This is a problem not just in Flint, Michigan, but in a lot of communities that are rural, impoverished, that have old infrastructure, right? And obviously the people within those communities are in those communities because they can't afford to leave. And many of them do not want to leave. And people like Little Miss Flint were advocating for clean water because those people want to be able to live within their communities. And for someone who is outside of that community to say, well, what's the big deal? You guys should just get up and go is in incredibly poor taste. And it's frustrating to me that a lot of people don't understand the inherent racism of it. Because if we were to ask white folks within good communities to just get up and go, you would immediately understand the problem with that. So I have to be honest, when I saw this video, it really shocked me. It really repulsed me. And I did make a couple of posts on social media about this video. By the way, you guys should totally follow me on Instagram. It's where I will sometimes post pictures of myself, excerpts from my blog, blaqueinthecity.com. I did that just today with my last post about my experience being fetishized by bisexuals. I like to use my Instagram as a way to update people about what I'm doing and the various things that I feel like writing about on my blog. Something I do a lot is I share my thread posts because I've learned that that is actually something that I can do on my Instagram. So I say recently, TikTok commentator Bo Grant made a video suggesting that data centers shouldn't be created in good communities, but instead should go up in places like Flint, Michigan. Before the video, I had followed her as I occasionally enjoyed her coverage of certain topics. But seeing this video was a reminder of how oftentimes white political content creators fall short when it comes to the subject of racism. When she says good communities, it's easy not to see the racism unless you understand the history of housing covenants, redlining, and segregation. Our government already places environmentally damaging things in spaces populated by non-white and especially Black people. It's called environmental racism. What she was advocating for is a long-established racist tradition. Like most white content creators called out for stuff like this, I'm sure there will be a race to innocence. She didn't mean it. She didn't know. She's happy to be more informed, etc. But it's actually that kind of deliberate naivete that is so dangerous. Your ignorance is dangerous, and I don't believe you're fully unaware. Bo Grant is aware about Flint enough to know that they don't have clean water. And despite observing the residents fighting for it, and thus their survival, because the mostly Black residents of Flint are already so dehumanized in her mind, she imagines that they'll be more accepting of pollution in their community. But she'd never stand for it. White folks are becoming much more bold about their white supremacy. I think many white people are struggling with the reality that these rich billionaires who you were relying on harming Black people first actually do not care about you. You think your community is good, but you are completely disposable to them. Black folks within communities like Flint already know that environmental racism is really an attempt at culling the Black population. The same can be said about healthcare and education being made inaccessible to the population at large. They didn't want Black people to have these things, so they would eventually die. These are the less overt ways that racism thrives. It allows people who do not see themselves as such to engage in it. That is how we got here. Too many white people in this country live within the delusion that the things that harm Black people systemically will never get to them. And that is how we got to the point where after years of ignoring environmental racism, you're shocked that they're trying to build data centers in your backyard. They do it first to the people you care least about, and then they use that foundation to push further and further and further. So instead of only caring when it's relevant to you, you should care when it happens to the people that society cares the least about. Because within our system, those people are always going to set a precedent. They'll never stop at the people who are the most marginalized. And I think that's an important thing for people to recognize. She's like, well, why are they putting it in good communities? In all reality, they have been doing this in the communities of people of color for a very, very long time. This is something that goes all the way back to the early days of industrialization. This is not new. It's just new to certain people right now because they come from histories where they've been able to not experience this. But the people who actively have to experience this because it's happening in their communities are more than aware. They're more than aware of exactly what this system is doing and exactly how it is positioned to privilege billionaires. And like I said, I think a lot of white people right now are struggling to recognize that the billionaires that they identified with for years never saw you as on the same footing, and that they relied on you viewing them as aspirational to get you to sign off on exactly what's happening right now. And had you cared a bit more about this enough to understand exactly why Flint, Michigan didn't have clean water. You would maybe not be so shocked by this because they've never cared about you. They've absolutely never cared about you. These motherfuckers want an army of slaves, and they want to be able to have as much power over as many people as they possibly can. I don't know why this escapes people, but it is something that I don't even think they hide very well. Anyway, let's get into some other responses from some thoughtful creators that I saw within my feed.
I don't understand why we have to go to good communities with drinkable water where people are already living and ruin their lives.
Oh, girl, this is not the take that you seem to think it was. First of all, maybe discontinue using the phrase good communities when using it in contrast to Flint, Michigan, a predominantly Black community. Secondly, the issue in Flint, Michigan was not the water itself. It was the pipes that were corroding and were leaching lead and other toxic chemicals into the water. But most importantly, I don't think you realize this, but you just reinvented the same exact structural racism that our country has been using against Black and brown communities since literally we became a country. Because what you are suggesting is putting dangerous infrastructure into Black and brown communities. Because the communities that you're rattling off, there are already environmental disasters that have happened. Those communities are almost always predominantly Black and brown because our government structures it to make it to where that harm is mostly done to Black and brown communities. What you are suggesting, it's the same thing that North Carolina did in the 80s when they chose a poor majority Black neighborhood as the site where they would dispose of PCB contaminated soil. It's the same thing that they did in New York City in West Harlem when they chose a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood to put a sewage treatment plant with open tanks for the sewage, resulting in fumes leaching into households and making everybody sick. It's the same thing that they did in Houston when they put every single one of the city's landfills and trash incinerators in predominantly Black neighborhoods. It's the same thing that they did to the Navajo Nation when they forcibly mined a bajillion tons of uranium core from the Navajo's land, and then afterwards were just like, bye, and bounced and left hundreds of abandoned uranium mines in the Navajo Nation for them to deal with, increasing the occurrence rates of cancer amongst the Navajo Nation. You're not suggesting anything new, sweetheart. This is the same exact structural racism that our country has been using and weaponizing against Black and brown communities forever. There is no community in which it is acceptable to allow these data centers to come in and steal from the community, f up the environment, and f up people's lives. It is rare for a take on the internet to make my jaw actually physically drop, but this one did it for sure.
And I really want to comment on that because it was so, I've had to learn not to give white content creators that much benefit of the doubt because frankly, shit like this happens constantly. Shit like this happens constantly where I follow someone and then, ooh, they're racist, right? It's not like I necessarily thought that Bo Grant was like, not like that, but it was sort of like, how do you not understand that that's not the right thing to say? Like, it was almost like, wow, like, how did you upload this and not even catch it? How did you make this video and not recognize that it was problematic? Genuinely, it was very fascinating to me that they didn't recognize that. It was actually quite shocking. It did make my jaw drop, but then almost immediately after that, I was like, yeah, that's kind of what I expect. For me, that's unfortunately where we're at. I have had to learn not to give white creators that much authority in my life because shit like this, it's constant. You can put yourself in a situation where you are too shocked by the reality of someone's racial ignorance. But I don't really think that it is ignorance. I think she knows to some degree. How does she not? How do you not know? She has gone on to apologize for this. Maybe I'll watch some of those videos after this. But at the end of the day, it's shocking that you didn't even catch that maybe that wasn't something to say.
Why are they putting it in good communities to ruin those communities?
What I'm hearing is that you want other communities to die, but let's answer your question. Why do data centers need clean water? I'm going to give you a very, very quick answer. Essentially, the water is used for cooling because it uses a lot of energy, produces a lot of heat. In order to cool, they have different techniques, but a vast majority of them use evaporative cooling. The same concept that you learned in basic chemistry in high school is that it takes heat in order to transform water from a liquid to a gas. So evaporative cooling essentially takes the hot air It runs it through water, and when the water evaporates, it cools down the air. Now, why do you need clean water? The problem is that when you use dirty water or you use water that's not clean, it has impurities in it, minerals and other solids that end up concentrating throughout the unit. So when the water evaporates, it leaves behind all these solids that end up causing a lot of problems. Corrosion, scaling, foul odors. Sometimes if there's microorganisms in the water, it can lead to contaminated air. Now, they are working on other techniques where it will use less water, or they have tried to use recycled water, which also has its own environmental concerns to be addressed. What you're describing is environmental racism, where Black and brown communities essentially are exposed to more chemical threats, such as in Flint, Michigan. In Flint, when I was in college, was essentially that they switched their water source to the Flint River, and that water was highly acidic. It ended up corroding the pipes, which leached lead into the water. I'm not sure what your intention with the video was. I'm hoping that you were just genuinely curious on why data centers need clean water, which is fine. I encourage people to ask questions, but I also encourage people to think about what they're saying when they say, let's put the data centers in the bad communities. Because historically, and even now, if you look at where the data centers are located, it's already in marginalized communities.
And so that's the thing. Even if you use this water for cooling, once that water is reduced and all that's left is the contaminants that caused the very issue with the water in Flint, Michigan, you are now introducing a new thing that could potentially worsen the situation. In other words, this is actually not a solution, not a viable solution. And if they could get around to cleaning that water, why wouldn't they just let that water be cleaned for the residents? Why would we need to specifically let the people in Flint, Michigan suffer so that people in good communities get to have a data center free environment, right? Like, it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. Now, this was another very informative video that was shared by a person who is actually from Flint, Michigan. And I thought that it would be very important to add to this conversation.
So I actually work in childhood lead poisoning prevention here in the state of Michigan. And I just want to clear up some things that is incorrect about a lot of the commentary surrounding the Flint water crisis. The Flint water crisis was connected to Flint's water supply. The lead piping that was corroding into the water supply added another layer to the problem. But the core of the issue was because the city officials, along with the emergency state manager, financial manager that was brought in by the state of Michigan, decided that they no longer wanted Flint to receive their water from the Detroit Water and Sewage Department, and they wanted to switch it to Flint River, knowing that their water tested at high levels of different contaminants, which included lead. They switched it because they no longer wanted to give Detroit the political power over the water supply. This is why the Great Lakes Water Authority was created. Currently, Flint receives water from the Great Lakes Water Authority, and their water source is from Lake Huron. So they do have a clean water source. Now, the problem is our infrastructure is old. Okay, majority of the state's infrastructure is at least a century years old. A majority of our homes, especially even in the Metro Detroit area, was built before 1978, where the use of lead paint and lead metal in order to create the water piping was legal. And even though lead paint and lead piping was banned in 1978, because much of our infrastructure never went through updated renovations, which meant that money from the state and federal government was never used to rebuild our homes, renovate our buildings. We have this issue with lead piping and lead paint, which causes the elevated blood lead levels that many of our children deal with today. Now, when it comes to the AI center, we don't need one. Whether we're going to use Lake Huron, the Detroit River, or Flint River, any water source that's close to the communities needs to be protected and cleaned for our use. and now for the use of AI. So y'all can kiss my ass when it comes to that. But I just wanted to clear that up because I don't know. And I know my stitches don't really go too many places, but if it does, you heard it from somebody who actually does the work daily.
And see, look, TikTok has so many terrible things about it. But one thing I really appreciate about the way that we're able to have these conversations is that we're able to sort of have the people who are actually living and actively experiencing the thing that we're all debating about come in and share directly from the source what is going on within their communities. I want to make a point that while all of this is happening, they are going to try to make it so that we have a harder time having communications like this, right? They want to isolate more and more communities from being able to have internet access and be able to have these conversations, right? I'm pointing that out now so that people can start to think about that and prepare, because frankly, I do think that it's going to become an issue. Increasingly, as the AI becomes more and more common, that is going to become one of the things that we face, that these communities will become so impoverished that they don't have internet access and that information cannot be freely shared. That's already going to be a concern with AI, right? So I thought that this was a story that was worth talking about and worth sharing because for me, it kind of demonstrated how people who are very well-meaning can still engage in behaviors that are quite problematic. A lot of people have told me that Beau Grant has a history of saying questionable things. I don't know how true that is, but this video left a negative impression of Beau Grant. So I did unfollow her because of this video. But anyway, I would love to hear from people who are in Flint, Michigan, how you felt about this video. What are some things that people outside of Flint, Michigan do not understand about what is happening in Flint, Michigan? To my understanding, there is accessible clean water in Flint, Michigan, but it's not 100%. There's an infrastructure issue that still needs to be addressed that is not going to be aided by the building of AI data centers within these communities. So I would love to hear from you. If you've got an AI data center built up in your community, please share with me how it's personally affected you, your family, and your water access. I do think that it's important to recognize that historically, control of water is one of the major ways in which people outside of the community have been able to control the community. And of course, it's not unsurprising to me that there's a segment of the population who does believe that predominantly Black and brown communities do not deserve access to clean water. That seems to be something that in some people's minds is reserved for those so-called good communities. Let me know what you guys have to say about this. Leave your comment in the comment box below. And as per usual, I want you to stay hot and introspective and always remember and never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.